Hello there. Hi, everyone. I'll just quickly say before we get started that today's session is going to be recorded. So understand if you'd like to keep your camera off, that's absolutely fine. If you do have any questions at any point, feel free to use, we've got the chat, and then I think we've also got the Q&A. So whichever you prefer, you can ask some questions there and we'll try and address those as we go through. But today's training is Rethinking Waste, an introduction to the circular economy. And with you today is myself, Megan McCamley. So I work at Business in the Community and I'm an environment program manager. And a big part of my role is going out and delivering some training, some online, some in person, with various things to do with climate change. And then this is one of our newer work streams of circular economy. So really excited to have with us on the call today Rachel from International Synergies. And I'm going to hand over to her once I've done my quick introduction to what the circular economy is, to really hopefully put that into practice and give us some nice examples of how that's been done by International Synergies really successfully. But a quick introduction then to who we are at Business in the Community, if you aren't so aware of us. So we are a membership organisation. We're Northern Ireland's Network for Responsible Business, and we provide our members primarily with advice and expertise on how to be a more responsible business. And we generally do this under 3 pillars of people, planet, and place. So quite diverse in that we link in the volunteer and the community, the wellbeing aspect, all in with this idea of climate and environment. But I work in the environment team, so mostly in that planet heading. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see an overview of what we do within the environment team. And the reason why I'm highlighting that is primarily to do with our NI environmental benchmarking survey. So this idea of waste management, circular economy was highlighted as one of the key topics in our survey last year. And as I introduce in the first few slides here about what the circular economy is, I'm going to use some data that we got from our survey last year of what people in NI and organisations in NI are saying about how they tackle waste and how they're starting to lean into that idea of the circular economy. So that's one of our main work streams. We also have a work stream called Business Action on Climate, and that's broadly what I'm doing in terms of the more broader environmental training and awareness and things like that. And then we also work under Nature and Biodiversity, and we've got our Business and Biodiversity Charter, where organisations can join in and take part and use it as a framework and work through the ranks to improve their biodiversity. So that's ranked from bronze all the way up to gold, in the same way that our survey is ranked from bronze up to gold and platinum for people who do really well with their environmental performance. So that's an overview of what we do and our core areas. Like I said, a big part of why this training and this webinar is happening is because the circular economy was identified as a gap in NI. And we started to ask more questions about that to see what people are doing here. So one of the questions that we asked in the survey last year was, is your organisation currently undertaking any improvement projects to reduce waste production? So you can have a think yourself there if you would say yes or no to that question from your organisation. But we did find that almost 95% of organisations said yes to that. So people are thinking about this. They're thinking about waste and how they can reduce their waste. As we go through today, you'll sort of start to see how the circular economy sort of takes that, and it's slightly different. It's not just about managing waste. It's a whole different idea of how we even think about waste and tackle waste, so that it's never created, really. So it's not just thinking about reducing it. Of those 95% who said yes and said that they had projects in place to reduce their waste, these are the kind of things that we're seeing come through. So things like reducing single-use paper, looking at waste segregation in offices, preventing things by going to landfill, by reusing, repurposing, remanufacturing. Even some people saying that they are talking with their suppliers to try and ensure that things are delivered with minimal packaging, and where possible to return that packaging back to the supplier so it can be reused and so on. So things like that are apparently quite common from our respondents. I should have said it was over 150 organisations in NI who took part last year, so it does give us a good spread of what people are thinking. Other things there are like equipment refurbishment and component reuse, and things like recycling and reuse of PPE and workwear and all those kind of things. What we're broadly seeing in these responses can be put into what's known as the waste hierarchy. So we all know reduce, reuse, recycle, quite a common way to think about it. But if we take it a step further, there is a bit more of a detailed hierarchy in how we tackle waste. And at the very top there, before you even start thinking about reducing, reusing, or recycling, we're thinking about preventing. So we want that waste to never have been created. So every sort of item that's created has a carbon footprint, and things that are produced and manufactured are using energy to be created. So if we're able to prevent that from the source and just continue to recycle and reuse the things we have, that has a huge impact on reducing the carbon footprint all around the world. And that's why that prevention part is so important. But you can see as you go down the list there in the hierarchy on the right-hand side, the ones at the top are obviously more important. So after prevention, the next thing we can do is reduce, then reuse, then recycle, and then we're starting to get into things like recovery. So energy recovery might be things like anaerobic digestion, where you might take energy from food waste, or things like waste sent for incineration, then that can be used as energy as well. But recovery is just one step above disposal, so it's not the recommended way to be tackling this waste. We want to be always thinking about how we can get back up to the top and thinking about preventing it in the first place. So we know that waste is a problem. We know that we want to be sort of reducing our waste. There's three main ways that we are going to go through here to think about why waste is a problem. So pollution is going to be the first one. Then we have climate change, the impacts on climate change, and then we're going to think about resource depletion and the natural resources that we are taking from whenever we're constantly making new things. So firstly, looking at the scale of the problem with waste. So we make 20 times more plastic than we did 50 years ago. Most of this can be easily recycled, but it still ends up in landfill. That's not frequently happening. And that graphic on the right-hand side there, I found that to be quite sort of shocking. So things down the bottom here, things like your toothbrush or even a polystyrene container that you might get lunch in, they take around 500 or 600 years to decompose. And whenever we say that word decompose, we can sort of maybe even reframe that. It's not really decomposing, it's just breaking down into smaller pieces. So plastic doesn't decompose and become part of the soil and contribute to the soil fertility. It just exists in smaller pieces. So things like plastic are never going to break down. 18 million tons of waste are sent to a landfill site in the UK every year. Again, a lot of this could be recycled, composted, or used again, but it's not. More than 40 million tons of commercial and industrial waste are generated in the UK each year, and industrial waste is responsible for almost half of all worldwide waste. So really sort of high numbers of waste that are being generated here. And again, for a lot of us, it's out of sight, out of mind. The second thing related to waste and why it's a problem is its impact on climate change, on global warming and climate change. So sort of in a nutshell, the way the Earth warms, the way global warming happens is because of an increase of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and the way they operate in the atmosphere is what's known as the greenhouse effect. So whenever we have more greenhouse gases, this sort of layer around the Earth, they sometimes call it nature's blanket of greenhouse gases, gets thicker, and then a lot of the heat that comes into the atmosphere by the sun cannot be reflected back out and it gets trapped. There's lots of ways that we see an increase in these greenhouse gases that then contributes to this warming effect. Things like the burning of fossil fuels to create energy, things like transport and fuel in our cars, agriculture, and of course waste is there as well. So all of these things add greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And waste in particular, whenever it goes to landfill and breaks down in a landfill site, it decomposes and releases a gas which is known as landfill gas. And that includes things like carbon dioxide and methane, which are two of our most potent greenhouse gases. And they just add into the atmosphere more and more and contribute to global warming. So that's another key reason why we need to be reducing the amount of waste in our planet. The final one then is thinking about the resource depletion that we are causing. So our current economic system can be considered what's known as a linear economy, and it's built on this model of extracting raw materials from nature, turning them into products, and then discarding them as waste when they're done. So in this system, products and materials are generally not used to their full potential. It's a linear economy, so as the name suggests, we move through that line from natural resources, take, make, dispose. When we get to the end of that line and we have what we're considering waste, we just go back to the start and take more natural resources. And that's a problem because we're taking more than we can sustain, and that is depleting our Earth's ecosystems. So yeah, we're using way more virgin materials than we can naturally replenish. This overconsumption exhausts the planet's vital ecosystems and threatens our quality of life. So over 90% of the products that we extract from the planet go directly to waste. I'm going to talk more about that in the next few slides, thinking about what's known as the circularity gap. But yeah, basically, in a linear economy, products and materials are not used to their full potential. It also contributes to pollution. Our natural systems are degraded, and that has knock-on effects on climate change, like I've just spoken about, and then also our biodiversity loss. So more than 50% of global biodiversity loss is linked to how we extract and process natural resources. So that alone is quite shocking, and that is a figure that we would want to be reducing, and that's something that we can achieve with the circular economy. So what is a circular economy? Basically, the circular economy is an economic model that aims to eliminate waste and promote sustainability through practices such as reuse, refurbishment, remanufacturing, and recycling. In this scenario, in a circular economy, resources are not sort of just consumed and then discarded. That would just destroy their value. Their value is retained by reusing, repairing them, and so on. When their value is retained, their carbon is also retained, and that's why it's so important for climate change. The circular economy is also so much more than just waste management. It encompasses this holistic approach to sustainability that aims to minimize waste and promote the efficient use of resources, and that requires a mindset shift as well. It's not something that's going to happen overnight for organizations. This is another one of the questions that we asked in our benchmarking survey. Like I said, we're starting to gather a bit more data on what organizations are looking to do in terms of the circular economy. So we asked, how is your organization maximizing the economic value of its waste? And we did get lots of interesting answers. So, for example, things like sustainable practices focusing on reducing, reusing, recycling. And there was an example in this one where they repurposed modular units from past projects to create new facilities. That's, of course, going to cut costs for an organisation, which is positive for them. That can be enticing. And it's also going to minimise waste by that reuse. We have another one here. So by sending electronic and electrical products to a local firm to be recycled and repurposed, they were able to retain some economic value of that waste. We have a third one here. Using fixed rate contracts with local companies who take and reuse the waste. Waste is also segregated to improve recycling quality. And sometimes in these scenarios, they were saying that the contractors can offer a rebate on some materials like metal that can be reused. So you can see you're starting to think about which materials sort of have value in terms of what can I sell on and who else can get use out of this after I'm finished with it. So it's not just waste. Waste is just a resource that can be reallocated somewhere else. And then a final example here. So through industrial symbiosis, we ensure that waste from our projects is used as a resource by other industries, creating value and supporting a circular economy. So that term, industrial symbiosis, is something we're going to hear about a good bit more as we move on to our guest speaker, Rachel. But if you haven't heard of that term before, industrial symbiosis is a process whereby companies basically share or exchange resources such as what would be considered maybe waste or a byproduct, energy, materials, all those sorts of things, and it enhances resource conservation and reduces environmental impact. So we're going to have some fantastic examples of those later. I mentioned there about this idea of a circularity gap. So the circularity gap quantifies the difference between the current linear use of materials and a fully circular economy. So it measures basically how far the global economy is from being circular, fully circular, and we want this figure to be as high as possible. Unfortunately, In 2025, this global circularity gap was 6.9%, meaning that only 6.9% of the materials entering the global economy are secondary materials, things that have been reused or repurposed or recycled. And this gap has actually been getting smaller. So in 2018, it was sitting closer to 9%, and that's decreased. So most of our waste is not being reused. We don't have that sort of mindset around reuse and repurpose the way we should. And in fact, the planet offers us up around 300 billion tons of natural resources every year. That's really not enough for us, apparently. We use 500 billion tons of virgin raw materials on an annual basis. Um, that is why this circularity gap is so small. So only 6.9% of those materials are then reused and repurposed, and then 90%, the other 90% or 92% of materials extracted and used globally are wasted after that single use. So it's a direct consequence of this linear economy that we are living in and that very much still exists, where we just extract something, use it once, and discard. This slide here is going to touch really briefly on some research from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so kind of the hub of all things circular economy. And what we can see from sort of this image in the middle here is how tackling emissions can be split into these two areas of energy and products. So this research identified that around 55% of emission reduction globally can be achieved through a move to renewable energy and things like using energy efficiency measures. That's going to help reduce emissions in that sense. But the other 45% relates broadly to what they're calling products. So these are harder to reduce emissions that arise from things like the management of land, the production of buildings, vehicles, electronics, clothes, food, packaging, all these goods that we sort of use every day and take for granted in the way that we use them. So a circular economy is essential in reducing such emissions by transforming the way we design and produce these goods. So this research by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation shows that through efficient and more circular use of materials in four key areas, such as cement, steel, plastics, and aluminium, those are the four key sort of resources or materials. If those are being able to turn into more circular resource use, that can lead to around a 40% reduction in emissions. If we're able to add food on as an extra area and that, thinking of how we can reduce our food waste, that's how we would reach that 45% reduction in emissions. So it's just looking at it through that different lens. There's a lot of sort of emphasis put on emission reduction and energy use and green energy use and how that's going to filter through sectors. But for those things that can't be sort of transitioned in that way to be more green, you need to go right back to the start. How are we designing these products and how are the manufacturers reusing those things when they get to a waste product? And in a way, it's quite sort of interesting to think that 45% of that can come from the way we use our products. And that just takes a shift in our mindset. This graph as well, then, this comes from the Circularity Gap Report 2025, and it goes into a bit more detail about how the circular economy can help close the emissions gap on a global scale. So the 3 points on screen there are basically the three principles of the circular economy. First one is to eliminate waste and pollution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the value chain. Then we want to circulate product and materials to retain their embodied energy and their embodied carbon, and then also regenerate nature to sequester carbon in soils and products. So through those three steps, that's how we're going to achieve that 45% reduction in emissions that are necessary. On the right-hand side there, we have a graph that kind of visualizes how this might be achieved. So this graph represents the greenhouse gases and temperature rise that is projected over the next sort of couple of years. and the targets that are being sort of related to in these figures and these temperature increases relate to the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement gave us a target to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees above our pre-industrial baseline. We are likely to surpass this. We're very much likely to surpass this, but this graph gives us some different options and a few different projections that could be placed with or without the use of a circular economy. So up here, line 1, this represents the billions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we expect to emit in the coming years in a business as usual scenario. And you can see the temperature increase there, getting up to 5 or 6 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So bearing in mind that 1.5 degrees was once our tipping point, it's quite scary that we could be reaching 5 degrees above that. Line 2 then, this second one, this represents the expected greenhouse gas emissions if all net zero strategies and plans around the world, all countries who have committed to net zero by 2050, if that is achieved, then this is where we might expect to be. So we're still looking at around maybe 2 to 3 degrees above our pre-industrial levels, but it is better. So a lot of these net zero plans would take into account things like your energy transition to green energy and so on. Line 3 then here at the bottom, this is what we are projected to achieve if we combine our net zero targets with circular economy strategies. So it's basically looking at that extra 45% that can't be considered with energy generation. So if you combine those net zero planning and your circular economy strategies, we could further reduce emissions to 1.8 degrees above our pre-industrial levels. You can see that's still above our target of 1.5, but it's the only way we're going to get sort of close to that target at our current rate. So that's kind of in a nutshell the circular economy and the relevance of it. The circular economy is a system where materials never become wasted and nature is regenerated, and it tackles many of these global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, waste management, and pollution. I'm going to really quickly go through some guidance for NI businesses, not in a huge amount of detail, but I wanted to point out at this point that after this webinar, we're going to release a toolkit that has a lot more information on sort of the practicalities and maybe next steps of what you might like to do. And we're going to include links to all of these resources and information points that we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail today. So you can look forward to that. But really quickly, I'll touch on a few of them. So the first one being the Circular Economy Task Force. So the UK is currently developing a national circular economy strategy, and it's supported by a series of sector-specific roadmaps. And this is being coordinated by this Circular Economy Task Force. You can see at the minute that's going to underpin the national strategy for England, but the sort of research and the points that go into creating this will be able to be extrapolated and used for us in terms of the interest. That sort of strategy obviously won't be applied here directly, but it's a bit more advanced than our draft strategy in NI. We can see the kind of themes that are going to be covered in that, looking at some sector baselines, looking at what priority materials you might like to start your circular economy journey on, things like circular design standards as well. The next one to touch on really quickly is the extended producer responsibility for packaging. So this is an approach that holds producers accountable for the entire life cycle of their products. And regulations came into force on this in January 2025, and that puts a new legal obligation on packaging producers in the UK. You can see here on the right-hand side, this idea of producer responsibility can be applied to many different sectors, things like batteries, electrical, end of life of vehicles, certainly electric vehicles as well. But in this particular one that relates to packaging, the aims are, of course, to reduce packaging waste, increase recycling rates, and shift costs from local authorities to businesses. And primarily, we're looking at it through this lens of the polluter pays. Digital waste tracking is also a scheme that's going to have a huge impact in terms of circular economy. And this is a UK-wide initiative which will require organisations to provide detailed sort of data on every waste transaction that occurs across the UK. This is already sort of being implemented. So phase 1 is in place and it's affecting 12,000 waste operators. And phase 2 will impact a further 300,000 registered waste carriers. So the scale of impact for this is going to be huge. Some of the benefits of this are, of course, the circular economy. So it gives us insights into material flows all across the UK. It encourages the likes of your reuse and recycling, and that's going to feed into the circular economy. So even just having that data and knowing what's currently happening to the waste in a bit more detail will give you the information to be able to manage that more effectively in the future. It gives us visibility, so tracking waste from its point of origin to its final treatment point, again, giving us new insight and intel. Another interesting one is crime. So it's going to prevent illegal dumping, misclassification, and unlawful exports. So where we might export waste to another country so that we don't have to report on it, that's going to be minimised, and that's really important for our accountability as well. So potential to save £1 billion that currently costs the UK crime related to waste. And this is going to be mandatory for all required waste operators by October 2027. We have the NI draft circular economy strategy. So this is still sort of being finalised, but the NI government is in the process of finalising the first circular economy strategy, and that was committed under the NI Executives Programme for Government 24 to 27. One of the things that it does touch on is this idea of a material footprint. So a material footprint is the measure of the global extraction of raw materials needed to meet the final demands for the population. So for Northern Ireland, for example. And here you can see that this is the sort of recommended material footprint, and ours is up here at about 16 tonnes, which is almost double the recommended. So we do have a very high material footprint. That basically means that in proportion to our population, we're using more carbon and more materials than we should. And this was also highlighted. Oh, there's our sectors, our main sectors, things like your construction, advanced manufacturing, tourism and hospitality would be the main sectors involved in this draft strategy. And the main material flows that are going to be tracked is things like food, electricals, textiles, and packaging. So packaging that will be related to the likes of the extended producer responsibility packaging programme. And this is the last thing I'm going to touch on. All of these reports are really interesting, and I would recommend you to take some time to dive into these and go through the key findings yourself. But this circularity gap report also looked at how it categorised Northern Ireland as a shift economy, and it's what I was referring to in the last slide about our material footprint. So our carbon footprint and our material footprint are disproportionately higher than our population. So there's a lot that we could be doing to improve that, and there's huge scope for improvement there. Our economy is only 7.9% circular, again, meaning there's huge potential for improving that. So 92% of our materials used are coming from virgin resources as well. So very similar to that global average of that circularity gap. And this report highlights that agriculture and construction are some of our most emission intensive sectors, which might not be that surprising, but a key thing to consider as well. So that's me basically wrapping up on this introduction to circular economy and a bit of the theory behind it, and maybe signposting to some guidance that you might like to look to in your own time. Just going to quickly point out, as I introduce our speaker, that this circularity gap report for NI was contributed to by the Chief Executive of International Synergies. So the idea of industrial symbiosis and how important that is to do with the circular economy approach and how we're going to make these improvements in NI, it is all very much included in that report. So it is a really interesting read. So I'm going to hand over now to our speaker, Rachel from International Synergies. International Synergies has been at the forefront of the circular economy for 20 years and is acknowledged as the world's leading expert on industrial symbiosis. They facilitate cost and carbon savings for clients by closing resource loops and moving from a linear to a circular economy, and they have delivered projects in over 50 countries. So Rachel Lombardi is joining us, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over, Rachel. Thank you.
That's super. Thank you very much, Megan. Does the sound still okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, you've kind of already done my first slide, so thank you very much for that. Right, thanks everyone for coming this morning or this afternoon to listen to a little bit about circular economy and industrial symbiosis, which we say is a tool to deliver the circular economy. And Megan has already done a brief introduction to industrial symbiosis. We basically say it's waste is a resource in the wrong place, and if we think about it cleverly, we can find something else to do with it. So an eggshell is waste to a baker, but an eggshell is a source of collagen, calcium that can go into face cream or vitamins. But the baker doesn't know about that because the baker knows everything about baking, right? So this cross-sector collaboration is where we can build up these industrial symbiosis transactions. So diving in then, let me keep an eye on the time. Yeah, okay. So as already mentioned, our mission is to lead the world in innovative industrial symbiosis solutions, and we take the international very seriously. So we've delivered projects in 50 countries so far, and facilitated over 50 million tons of carbon reduction. The vast majority of that, 42 million, when we had a national program in England. And as already addressed somewhat by Megan, the economic value generated through being more efficient, because that's what it comes down to, whether you've been around as long as I have and seen it go through a circular economy. Before that, it was sustainable development. Before that, this is sustainability, one planet. Basically, it comes down to being efficient with our resources. So, and that's a good economic value from that. So what we do then, the industrial symbiosis facilitation itself, which is the resource matching service in Northern Ireland through Invest Northern Ireland and Department for Economy. I'll spend most of my time on that. It's most relevant probably to the folks on the call. But we also have a resource matching platform, which has been an expert tool since as long as we've been around, which is now coming to the market for people to be getting stuck into if they choose to do so. More about all of this on our website. Net Zero Strategies for Industry is helping them look across their processes and products and say, how can we lower our carbon footprint through this kind of approach? A place-based decarbonization strategy is applying, again, the same kinds of ideas to identifying the potential in an area for improving the area as a whole. So I have some projects with Birmingham City Council, for example, on more sustainable economic development. Capacity building is what it says on the tin. Training, which we've done literally around the world for facilitators, but also companies and councils who are interested in incorporating into their activities. And then collaborative activities and research include European projects, World Bank projects. We've got one on standardization at the moment through the Commission. So why are we doing this? Again, Megan's done a good job of laying out some of the foundations of circular economy and stuff, but this one for me is the one that really is the sucker punch. So you're looking across the pie charts for various sectors: materials, communications, consumer discretion across the top line, for example, and the breakdown of emissions between scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 3 is the gold and the silver. And scope 3 is the majority of emissions for almost every sector, utilities, and the bottom line being an obvious exception. But that scope 3 that folks kind of don't always, it's broadly defined with the supply chain and the customer, so upstream and downstream, embedded energy, and so on. This is where we have a very big impact through industrial symbiosis. So I mentioned waste is a resource in the wrong place. What we're looking to do is valorize the waste for the waste generator, identify alternative raw material substitution for the end user, and 80% of this is through a cross-sector collaboration. So within your industry, you probably share certain characteristics of processes. So if your processes generate waste heat, your competitors' processes probably generate waste heat. We need to look outside your sector, which is where sometimes the challenge comes for companies, because again, we're expert within what we do, but learning about the businesses outside can be a challenge. And that's where the industrial symbiosis facilitation is very useful. So we've been lucky enough, and we're very proud to have been delivering this resource matching service contract in Northern Ireland since 2007. It has been retendered, of course, and it is, as far as we are aware, and we do get around a bit, the longest running facilitated IS program in the world, engaging businesses and providing the service of helping identify industrial symbiosis transactions for free to businesses in Northern Ireland. So we start with understanding the resource haves and wants. This is not the same as doing a mass flow analysis or a full resource audit. We don't need to know the secret ingredient to Coca-Cola to be able to help Coca-Cola with some of the byproducts, packaging waste that's going on through that process. So walk around will give you an idea of, or will give us an idea of what the wastes are. People will have an initial list, but we very often find that a walk around will identify quite a few additional opportunities. In part because we are helping people think broadly about the resources. So they start off saying, well, waste is what goes in the skip. Well, yes, it is. And then there's a whole bunch of other kinds of resources that are running around, including capacity and equipment. It doesn't have to be something I can poke with my finger. The testing equipment, if you're only at capacity 2 days of the 5 days a week, you can bring in additional, provide that service, for example. So thinking broadly about those resources and focusing on those where you have a cost or a concern or a risk. This is another way with diversifying supply chains where we can mitigate risk with businesses. In the RMS and in our NIST methodology worldwide, we hold resource matching workshops. And these are a little old-fashioned with slips of paper that we pass around, and that's for very good reason. It gives people time to think and ask questions and make notes. So the way we can tell that the workshops are working is that the noise level, it starts real quiet because the baker's sitting next to the cement guy and sitting next to the automotive guy, and they're like, why are you here? But then as they realize what the potential synergies are between the different industries, the noise level goes up, the pieces of paper flying, people are making notes, passing business cards and such. So it's a really good time. We hold 4 matching workshops a year for Northern Ireland. The one just a couple of weeks ago with 22 attendees identified 14 million pounds of potential cost savings. Now, not all of that will be realized. There'll be, or, logistics issues or process issues or contaminant issues or whatever, but it's that kind of the size of the prize that you're going after through 70 ideas in this case. And this is not an uncommon result. Then all of that, after the workshop, all the information goes into the Synergy Resource Matching Platform, which, as I say, has been in use. It's hosted data from 30 countries around the world. We use it because with all of the stuff that came out of that one workshop, and now you multiply that by 4 each year, and then by 17 years, we've got a lot of information on companies and resources and matches. And this also holds our library of successes so that we can be efficient with our time looking up what's been done before. And this is what Synergy Direct is, what's coming to the market. Happy for inquiries about that. So a few quick examples, not going into the details of, although I will say every single one of these where I'm just going to show you, oh, this went to that, and voila, involved multiple company meetings, support with building up the case studies, the technical specifications, exchanging samples, doing testing, and so on. So this is important to recognize the investment of the companies in realizing these kinds of opportunities. So biomass ash into cement for ordinary Portland cement replacement. This was one example that reached almost 1 million pounds of savings and almost 5,000 tons of carbon, rehoming this biomass ash that would have probably gone to landfill into cement replacement. In one of the target sectors that Megan mentioned of construction. This one I like, leather offcuts coming from a seat manufacturer going to local community groups. But some of these actually went back into the seat manufacturer for use on the floor. And as you see, avoided incineration. So scraps to the seat manufacturer, but useful products. Waste plastic recycled through the windows. So again, automotive, construction waste, and end-of-life window frames. They asked for 50 tons a week. We found them 150 tons per week. And this is now feeding a 99% recycled content product in Northern Ireland, delivering cost and carbon savings, additional sales. A door manufacturing company had plate glass offcuts that had been going to disposal. We found that those plate glass offcuts could be crushed and repurposed and going into both blocks and blast media. So a good example of, yes, some savings from waste costs and avoiding disposal of glass. This is one of my favorites. Breweries are always really good for industrial symbiosis. You see on the left a list of the different wastes that were identified and where they can go, listed on the right. So the spent grains into pig feed, for example, the barley and hop bags repurposed, the beer kegs put back into the cycle for reuse. This is a local example. Again, it's not the industrial part of industrial symbiosis, but the impacts of this kind of a network of communication and timely and transparent information. Which is why I include this one. We had the National Trust contact us with an urgent request for cardboard because they were getting ready to do some work in a park and they needed this cardboard for the work crew who was coming the day after or 2 days after to tidy up one of the National Trust properties. And because of the Synergy software and the database that's on there of current resources, we were able to identify a local collaboration quite quickly. And they were able to collect within an hour. So this one doesn't necessarily change the world, but for me, it's a very important indicator of the local, the power of the network and the power of the data. Now, taking that one, that was a local example. We also have a few cross-border examples where we can't find a solution in Northern Ireland or under other programs where we were encouraged to find cross-border opportunities. This was a company that was shutting down and had a modular clean room that was 20,000 pounds of dismantling disposal costs and 150 tons of carbon. And what we did was found them a company that could use the modular clean room, and they bought it off of them. So that's where we mentioned it's not only what goes in the skip, but other kit. And that cross-island thing I think is important. So Megan again mentioned a number of the recent reports. We were lucky enough to contribute to one for Intertrade Ireland not too long ago, February 2024. On circular economy business opportunities on the island of Ireland. So again, we mentioned the cross-sector communication, the cross-sector opportunities are huge. 80% of our opportunities cross-sector. Even in construction, by the way, it's 50%. So still going to Brian. So still substantial. And what we found there, again, nothing surprises between different sectors. Waste legislation is a barrier, and the digital waste tracking that Megan mentioned, probably worth noting for those of you who are very intimately familiar with your duty of care and waste transfer notes. It's basically the waste transfer notes being put online. So it will make the information much more accessible because everybody knows your waste transfer notes sort of sit in a cupboard somewhere and very difficult to access. But what we found, again, is that cross-border forum on implementation is very important. Education campaign on the practicalities. So talking about circular economy as an idea is lovely, but what does it mean for my business and how do I get started? And then obviously the timeliness and transparency of the data. And that's where Synergy again comes in as being very useful. So we've talked a little bit about the national resource matching service across Northern Ireland, but we also operate at regional and local scales. So this one is a regional, the long acronym is the West Midlands Resource Reuse Network Impact. So this is a West Midlands in England based activity, which came at it in a similar way to the circular economy report again Megan mentioned, with a with a specific focus on certain resources. So RMS in Northern Ireland is open to all businesses, all resources. This one, we were encouraged to focus on certain resources, casting, sand, fiberglass, dust, topsoil, and so on, that were identified as having a particularly large environmental impact through the volumes of the materials. And here you can see some of the results. This is an ongoing project. So we're just completing 2 years, but we've got 84,000 pounds of savings complete and 700 or 600,000 in progress, landfill avoided and carbon equivalent listed there. So it's a more strategic approach to identifying industrial symbiosis opportunities aligned to strategy. CBAS is the circular economy for Birmingham, and it's a city level impact. Again, 2 years going, much more SMEs, micros, educational approach that helps businesses, again, relate to these concepts for their own business, perhaps develop a plan or a strategy themselves, and start understanding, as it says, the carbon literacy and resource efficiency. So how do I get started on this? So related, but not the same. This is not someplace where we would have 10,000 tons of foundry sand. Again, Megan mentioned the importance of construction, and changing the standard operating procedure in construction is no small challenge. We've done quite a bit of work in this area with infrastructure. This one is just one example from the high-speed rail that's being built from London to Birmingham. They needed to relocate a water distribution pipework. Turned out that the excavation that was done to do that was old landfill site, so it couldn't be dug up and put back. It needed replacing. It was a fortunate place in that there was on-site storage available. So as class 1, 2, 3 fill became available in the area, they could have stored it on site. We identified a number of opportunities with home builder and wastewater treatment plant. Although the company then eventually, as they saw what we were doing, they actually internalized it and said, actually, we're going to keep this in-house. But we're something like 400,000 pounds savings through not purchasing fill outside, but ensuring that, again, that timeliness and transparency, and it's a bit of a broken record from me, the timeliness and transparency of the information was such that those opportunities to keep resources moving were realized. So decking to abrasives, this is decking and cladding coming off of buildings through deconstruction. Turns out that stuff can be processed such that it can be used as abrasives. This one was almost 200,000 pounds of savings realized by the company from avoiding landfill. A wastewater treatment supply chain. So again, this is, we focused on capital delivery. So where they're digging pipelines, installing infrastructure and so on. Again, with an analysis, a retroactive analysis on 13 months of data of all of the movements on and off site of soils and aggregates and pipes and Harris fence panels and porta cabins and so on. We identified a potential for 15 million pounds per annum savings across capital delivery. When we were let off our leash and able to deliver, there was 250,000 pounds of savings realized over a few months with just a few selected facilitation. The challenge we find is, again, transforming the business as usual or the standard operating procedure, because everybody's getting on with their job and it's very understandable, and their bosses want them to get on with their job. And we're asking them to have a different look, take a different approach, transfer some samples, explore another opportunity. And it takes time. So it's not to be underestimated. Now, obviously, 250,000 pounds, probably worth the time in this case. But it still has to be recognized that people need the agency to be able to do it. So this idea of industrial symbiosis, the idea itself has been around forever, right? I mean, farmers have used waste fruit to feed livestock and so on forever and ever. But it's just come into the consciousness in the 80s and 90s, into the academic literature and so on, and really taking off through the global institutions, UNEP, UNIDO, WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, World Bank, OECD. All of these folks are getting really stuck in. And Megan mentioned the circular economy action plan from the Commission, industrial symbiosis features quite centrally there. Also the Circular Economy Task Force, where our chairman, Peter Laybourne, was involved with that task force as well. So it just makes sense, but even something that just makes sense needs to be appropriately supported, and the regulatory barriers need to be looked at and so on. So we know it delivers against carbon, cost, new revenue generation, and other environmental metrics, saving water. We can even realize synergies around hazardous waste, for example. But it needs to be enabled through the system. So a bit of a whirlwind from me, but thank you very much for your attention and the invitation to participate in the webinar. More information on all of the projects, including the resource matching service, always featured very proudly on our homepage. So you can find more about the 6 offers that I mentioned briefly before, but specifically more about the resource matching service in particular, and sign up for contact from one of our practitioners based in Northern Ireland who can come out and help you with your business. And the info at email will get you channeled into the right office. So yes, thank you very much. And yeah, I don't know, Megan, if we have time for questions, I'm happy to take them, but obviously over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was fantastic. Do we have any questions? I haven't seen any come through there, but just as Rachel was finishing up, if anyone had any questions, you can pop those in the chat. We are also going to run part 2 to our circular economy series. So if you have any thoughts on what you might like to see in that coming up in the next few weeks, feel free to pop those in the chat as well, and we can see if we can address those as they come up. But if there are no other questions at this point, I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple of quick things before I let you go, hopefully on time. So the first one is the part 2 to the series, like I mentioned. So part 2, we are going to follow a similar structure. We're going to dive into a bit more detail on some of those maybe regulations that are coming in. And then we have another guest speaker from RAP NI who's going to talk in a bit more detail about how recycling works in NI. And Paddy from RAP is a plastics specialist. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say, and he'll offer some case studies as well. So I can send this information out to yourselves afterwards for everyone who attended today. But if you are interested at a glance, you can scan that QR code and register to take part. And we also have another event coming up on the 12th of March. This is a consultation on NI's draft waste strategy that's coming up. So this again is an online webinar, 45 minutes on the 12th of March. And we'd be delighted to hear all of your thoughts. We can help shape that sort of consultation and what NI's waste strategy should or could look like. But that wraps up everything today. I have one quick ask from Ryan. I think Ryan's on the call. Ryan is from our membership team, one of our relationship managers. And for those of you on the call who are less familiar with us or don't know what our membership offer might look like, Ryan's just going to take a quick minute or two to describe that to you. I can see he's just popped his email address in the chat if you have any questions. But over to you, Ryan, and then that's us all done.
Thank you, Megan. And yes, I'll be quick, as everyone's probably now looking to get away for lunch. So I just wanted to join to say that for those of you who may be newer to these sessions or are not a member of business in the community, we are both a charity and a membership organisation, and we work with over 250 organisations across the private and the public sectors. And our role essentially in Northern Ireland is to convene sessions like this around key environmental, workplace and community issues that are facing businesses like your own or organisations like your own. So many of our sessions are free for members and non-members, but if you would like a more on the pulse or tailored approach that's bespoke for your organisation, you might want to consider exploring the value of joining business in the community as a member. And I've put my email in the chat there. So if anyone wants to have a conversation about what that involves and what it might look like, you can feel free to reach out to me. Okay. Thank you, Megan.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan, for that quick overview. And yes, thanks everyone. I can see a few people having to head off there in the comments, but thanks everyone for attending today. And hope you found that as enjoyable as I did hearing from Rachel's examples. So thank you all, and have a lovely rest of your afternoon.